Hello, and thank you for joining us on the Freedom from the Struggle podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Corelli. Tonight, we have an exciting episode where we're going to cover one of the most prolific possession stories in modern history. Tonight, we're going to cover the Ammons haunting, or what's known as the Demon House, or sometimes known as the House of 200 Demons. So get ready for that. But before we do that, we're going to do a little bit of housekeeping here to tell you what's going on with this podcast. First and foremost, if you're new to us, this podcast exists for those of you who are struggling with spiritual warfare or demonic attack, or you simply want to know a little more about the theology of demons. That's what we're here for. So if you find yourself struggling with a demonic attack, or you feel like there's just something not going right in your life, we'd like to have you reach out to us by sending us an email at anthony@thestruggleseries.com. We entertain every email, and we'd love to just answer your questions. And sometimes we might interview you on the air or even read a letter that you wrote us. Because what we want to do is find you a place that you're safe and that you feel like you can be yourself and be heard and be believed. So that's why we exist. And we do that by sometimes covering your letters. But like tonight, we are also going to cover a very famous possession story in order to explain how deliverance ministry and that intervention actually helped this family. In addition, if you're new to this podcast, I just want to remind you that we also have a second podcast, which is basically my trilogy of books entitled The Struggle Series. We're releasing those in story format on a separate podcast entitled, of course, The Struggle Series. And you can listen to those wherever you listen to your podcasts. So the same place that you're listening to this podcast. And if you were to tune in right now as this is being recorded, you can hear the entire book one entitled The Struggle in its entirety on that podcast. And actually, by the time you listen to this, there will probably be chapters 1 and 2 of the second book entitled The Sacrifice. So please check that out. Also, if you like to listen on YouTube and Rumble, we are starting to release book one entitled The Struggle on Rumble, and we're doing some minor visual. It's not really something that's high production, but it's definitely something that if you like to listen on that format, you can start to listen to The Struggle as of right now. And probably by the time that you listen to this, you should have chapters 1 and 2. So, with all that being said, what I want to do now is kind of take you in the direction that this podcast is going in terms of some changes that we're making here. And I'm excited to introduce to you for the first time as my co host. This is my fiance, Melissa. How are you doing, Melissa?
Hi, Anthony. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Well, I am so glad that you're here. For those of you who have been listening, a few weeks ago, Melissa joined us as a guest, and we were kind of just testing the waters a little bit to see if this is something she felt comfortable with. And because she did such a great job, we've decided to add her as a co host. And so, what we're going to do is break down this possession story together. But before we get to that, what I wanted to do is, in case people didn't listen to Melissa's previous episode, just tell us a little bit, Melissa, about kind of your views on the paranormal, about hauntings, maybe give some recaps of some of your paranormal stories. Just let the audience know who you are in relation to what we're doing here on Freedom from the Struggle.
Oh, well, thank you. And congratulations on uploading your new book or the first book, The Struggle. I think I'm up to chapter 16, and it's very exciting. It sounds really nice. Great book. You guys most definitely should take a look or take a listen. It's really good. So I was on one of your episodes before, and just kind of the paranormal is kind of new to me, as far as any experiences or anything. I do enjoy watching the paranormal shows and things like that, and I do believe in like demons and the devil, can get into your life and take control and have you doing things that you normally would not do. Put you in a state of depression, anxiety, just feeling the terrible thoughts, throughout the day, through different periods of your life.
Absolutely, for sure. And tell them a little bit about your ghost story because I think that's one that people gave some feedback on in terms of this ghost story that has a ton of witnesses to it. Go ahead and retell that if you don't mind.
Okay, yeah, great. So this was many, many years ago. I was at one of my friend's house and we were just sitting around watching TV. But prior to that, when I would go to their house, they had a really pretty house and had a huge bay window. So as soon as you walked into the house, the way the house was designed, you can automatically see the backyard just straight through the living room. And it was just a really huge, the whole wall was actually um, just a window, because the grandmother that lived there, she had a beautiful garden, beautiful flowers, the uh, purple, blues, orange, yellow, green. All the neighbors always admired her flowers. And I always saw this lady in the backyard, and I thought she was just a neighbor that was coming over. You know how some people, they just go in, I'm just going to take a pinch and I could just put in some water and grow some roots and I'll just repot this and it'll be beautiful on my front porch. And so I just assumed it was a neighbor out admiring the backyard, not thinking anything of it. But I remember seeing, someone out there a few times. But so this particular time we were watching a movie, and all of a sudden, I was sitting on the edge of the sofa, and then I felt this cool breeze, just like a wind came by, a very cold breeze. I mean, ice cold, like I just, someone opened the freezer and you're standing right in front of it. And I was like, oh, that was chilly. I didn't think anything of it. And then all of a sudden, I saw this lady just walked from where my friend's mother bedroom was across the hallway to the bathroom in the hallway. And then I was like, huh, did anybody see that? And the youngest son said, oh, yeah, did you see her too? And I said, saw who? And he said, oh, that was my grandma. And I was like, did your grandmother pass away several years ago? And he said, oh, yeah, but she comes by and, I see her all the time. And I couldn't believe what I just saw. I mean, a full body, what do you call it?
Apparition.
Apparition? Yes. I mean, just I saw her face, her clothes, and I described what she looked like, what she had on, and I didn't think anything of it about it being the same person that I saw out in the garden. So the mother got up and she said, "Oh yeah, that's my mom." So she went into the bedroom and she had a photo of her mother on her dresser and she showed it to me and it was her. It was I could describe the hat she had on, the dress she had on, the color, her demeanor, just everything. And I still to this day just can't believe what I saw. It didn't scare me, but it stunned me for a few minutes for sure.
Well, I think yeah, I think it would stun anybody. To watch paranormal shows off and on probably your life, but not
Uh-huh.
something that was really your cup of tea. And of course, we're going to talk a little bit about a famous ghost hunter that you knew about. But when you
Mhm.
see it with your own eyes versus seeing it
Exactly.
on a camera, it'll shock you. It'll change your life
Oh,
because
yeah.
it will make a non-believer a believer very quickly. And so a person that was a believer, it will make them a solid believer because they now have proof. It's not just on faith, but it's a real life entity that's right in your vision.
Yeah, and to see her in the backyard, that was the same lady, the same person, that I would see out in the garden. That was her pride and joy, was the garden. I mean, it was beautiful, little benches and things like that, and little trinkets in the yard. It was gorgeous, but
Now tell
oh
them
yeah.
about the story that we had together because this is my favorite story because I knew at that moment that if she's dating this guy and she thinks he's a weirdo or thinks he's crazy, she now saw what I saw. So go ahead and tell that story as
Oh
well.
yeah. So it was we were looking at some model homes. So it was maybe in the summer, midwinter time. I know the time had just changed, so it was getting dark, maybe around 5:15. So the office, I think, closed at like 5. So we were leaving the office. So it was you and I, your mom, and your youngest daughter. And so we were leaving, looking at the model home, and I think I was in front. And so we were leaving, walking to the car, and I saw this light, and it was maybe the size of a tennis ball, and it just kinda it got bigger, and then I was seeing it, and then it just shot across us, and it stopped me in my tracks, and I think I said, "Did you see that?" And then you said, "Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that you saw it." And it just happened so fast, and it like one of those orb things
Yeah.
that you see on TV.
Well, and for the record, she saw it as an orb, but I had actually saw it manifest into a demon, and then as it was shrinking itself and darting in between the two model homes that we were looking at, that's when she saw it. But I always joke
Oh,
with her
yeah.
because let's be honest, and we talked about this in her previous episode that she did as a guest, that I often get a lot of slack for, believing in fairy tales, or, people say weird things to us. But when you start dating somebody who says, I'm a retired minister, I did a lot of deliverance, I like to help people with this, and I've seen demons my whole life. I think she was very gracious, and I think she was very understanding, but in that moment it was good for me because could see what I see all the time. And so when she saw it and I saw it again, it corroborates that, I didn't just see that and nobody else
It's
did.
uh-huh.
And so if you hear a lot of skeptics, especially I would say, what they call optimistic skeptics, where they say, well, I'm not sure what I believe, but I'm optimistic that I'll eventually see something. All of those types of skeptics will say what makes them believe a certain story is corroborating witnesses.
Mhm.
And so when two or more people see the same thing, it happened, right? At
Oh,
least
yeah,
something
it happened.
happened. And so
Uh-huh.
that definitely did.
Well, I'm glad I just saw the orb part and not the demon part that would have really I'd have ran to the car screaming, "Ah! Help me,
Yeah. So I've often joked with her that the next time I get a call to go
help
help
me."
somebody who thinks they're possessed, then she adamantly says she'll stay home and pray for me. So we'll leave it at that. But what we want to do tonight is kind of take a well-known haunting case, and I think most of you who are listening have probably heard of this case, but in case you haven't, I'm going to give a little bit of background, and we're going to take this case not from the actual facts themselves, but from an actual documentary and then a subsequent, like a lost tapes piece of the documentary known as The Demon House, that was produced by the well-known Ghost Adventures host, Zac Bagans. And so this story occurred in 2011 in Gary, Indiana, when a woman by the name of Latoya Ammons and her mother, Rosa Campbell, lived in a home that was a rental home with her three children. And what started to happen in the house became something that built up some momentum and actually has a ton of I would say, well vetted corroborating witnesses.
Mhm.
And so what happened is in 2011, Rosa, the mother, the grandmother of the children, she was the first one to see something in the home. So this is a tiny home. You walk in the front door, it's got a screened in porch. You walk in, there's two bedrooms to the right, a small living room. You go into a kind of towards the back of that level, just to the right past the bedrooms is a bathroom. And then if you keep going straight, there is a very tiny kitchen, no dining room.
Yeah.
It's just
Mhm.
a very small little house. And then through that kitchen is the stairway to a basement. But Rosa was the person in the very first bedroom right off the front door. And what she saw, what she said was a man that was pacing back and forth in the living room. And of course, out of fear, she didn't know what to do. But because her grandchildren and her daughter are in the house, she decided to get up and investigate. But when she got out into the living room, all she found was a boot print. And so if you saw the documentary, if you've seen, excuse me, the documentary, you will notice that there's a screened in porch and then a front door. There's no way he could have gotten out without making a ton of noise. Or if he went through the kitchen, there's no way he could have gotten out through the basement because there's no door to the outside. So she knew something was wrong. But it didn't take long for the kids to start to suffer. For example, Latoya Ammons' 12-year-old daughter claimed that when she was having a sleepover with a friend, she was levitating above the bed. And when they asked her about it later, she had no recollection. So just picture that in your head. She's levitating. They start to pray for her. The girl's lowered down to the bed and then has no recollection. Now, the older son was allegedly thrown across the room by an unknown force. And the younger son allegedly had his eyes roll up into the back of his head and was growling, saying, "It's time to die. I'm going to kill you," that type of thing. So, like I would say a good family and good parent would do is they took the children to their physician, and the
Mhm.
physician's name was Jeffrey Onyakuwu. This was about April of 2012, about the middle of April. And let's be honest, because we want to make sure we cover the facts as best we can. That physician considered the family delusional. He thought, they're making up stories, or maybe best case scenario, there's some mental illness, some delusions. So he contacted the police, and when the police arrived, they were taken to the hospital, and they basically said that the youngest boy especially, began to scream and thrash and was headbutting his grandmother. And so they decided to call Child Protective Services, or what's called the Department of Child Services in Indiana. And a woman by the name of Valerie Washington reported to the hospital. And this is where the story gets crazy if you don't know this story, because Valerie, a doctor, and a nurse all watched this event. So as they were talking to the youngest boy, he grabbed his grandmother's hand and walked backwards up the wall, flipped over the top of her, and landed on the other side of her. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about this before we get to the documentary, because there's been so many skeptics that try to beat this story up. And one of the skeptics, actually a couple of the skeptics, but one of the main ones, said that it was simply a trick that the boy and his grandmother had rehearsed. And my response to that is, okay, well, you do it.
Exactly.
You turn your back towards the wall, hold my hand, and walk backwards up the wall to where you're so high in the air that you flip over the top of me and land on the other side. Why I believe this story is true, because Valerie Washington,
Mhm.
by the time her intervention with this family was over, she literally moved. She didn't just get off the case. She resigned her position and moved
To another state.
to another state. The
And never talked about
And so
this
these are in Child Protective Services
report.
reports.
Mhm.
So there's witnesses to these stories. So long story short, police get called, they go out to the house, and a priest by the name of Michael Maginot was also brought out to the house. And while they're investigating with another Child Protective Services worker, the blinds in the house begin to seep an oil. And of course, like police do, they're skeptical, because I would be too. So they segregated the house, cleaned off the blinds, and made sure nobody went in there. And it started to occur again. And one of the new Child Protective Services workers actually touched this substance, and her hand went white, almost like she was a leper.
Mhm.
And that woman ended up having a series of unfortunate kind of circumstances that they attribute to her being in the house. Now, I want to say this. This is witnessed by a police captain by the name of Charles Austin. There was also a lieutenant that was there,
Mhm.
as well as Child Protective Services. And so, again, when we're talking about is a story at least potentially true, you'd want witnesses
And a 5-page police report.
and a 5-page police report. And we'll get to that when we get to the documentary for sure, if you don't mind helping me remember that. Because what happens is that you have a police captain and a lieutenant. So these aren't just run of the mill kind of
Mhm.
like beat cops. These are supervisors. These are people that would have a lot of integrity and have risen up the ranks. Now, I want to kind of stop there because those are the basic facts of the story. Now, to get to the point of what we're doing today, when this was reported in the news, because it was national news, because a child protective services worker and a doctor and a nurse watched a child walk backwards up the wall. And so they had no doubt that it was possession. And so it became a story. Now, if you are familiar with Zac Bagans from the Ghost Adventures crew, you will know that he is, what would I say, eccentric, extravagant.
Mhm.
So he was watching this and decided to make a call and bought the house sight unseen for $35,000 because he's kind of a collector of these things. Now, before we get to the episode, I just want to say this. You're going to hear some skepticism from me during this episode in regards to Zac. Now, I want to clarify here. I don't dislike Zac Bagans. I actually think he's very good at what he does in terms of production value, in terms of putting, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the single most popular ghost hunting or paranormal show that's ever existed. But with that being said, Zac is a showman. And so there's a lot of things about Zac that someone who does deliverance ministry will I guess maybe struggle with or take offense to because
Mhm.
although Zac in some of his episodes has brought in priests and deliverance people for some families, I would also have some critique of him that he goes into homes and riles people up or riles up the spirits and then leaves people to deal with the aftermath. And so I don't know him. And so I want to be fair as best I can. But you're going to hear that throughout the tone because as I watch this Demon House documentary and the subsequent Lost Tapes episode from that documentary, I see it through a skeptical eye because of who I know is producing this. So, with that being said, Melissa and I decided to sit down. I've watched it several times, but and rewatch these right back to back. And so the show starts out with Zac buying this home, flying to Indiana with his crew, and he shows up at the house, and there's some squatters there. And then he's on a search to try to find witnesses. Kind of take it from there. What did you notice?
Oh, I noticed. Well, I started watching Zach when I guess back when he originally started his show, um, like the ghost hunting. That was really a lot of. It was interesting. As I think was when I first started watching like paranormal shows, and plus Zach is kind of cute. All the girls like to watch TV
Of course.
with somebody. And the production, like you said earlier, I mean, he does amazing work, and the editing, just the footage, the production is just top notch. So you can't beat that. So it makes it a lot easier to watch. It's like a lot more professional than some of these that are you know shot with their cell phones or something like that. But so that the first time I watched it was when you and I watched it together, and I remember hearing about the youngest son, and that the family was saying that they have demons and devils and things like that, and they're being tormented, in that house. And then I think there were people that lived there before that experienced the same thing, but no one really said anything of it. I think they just kind of took it as, oh, this is just a bad house, or, just bad things happen. But one of a lady that would live there before, she her brother lived with them, and she would never go down into the basement. And I think her brother like passed away or died in the basement. And so you have, and I think there's like 8 or 9 people that died in that house over the last 20 years. And
Yeah,
that's
that's
a
what the
little,
neighbors had
yeah,
said.
that's what neighbor said, and the owner of the house. But just watching the show and um, like the history behind it. So I kind of knew what the show was about, but it did scare me when just watching some of the footage, and like some of that young girl, that the other family that went in there to look at the house that lived there before, about the brother that passed away. and you can see in her eyes that that demon in that house attached to her. I mean, at that moment, and that was the original footage. That wasn't anything that Zac was filming. And that, I mean, you can see it in her eyes, and I'll let you tell
Yeah.
what happened to that young girl.
And if you
It's
haven't
sad and
watched,
scary.
it is scary. And if you haven't watched the documentary, while he's filming, a woman pulls up in her car with her kids in the car. And she explains that she used to live in the house, which of course prompts Zac to say, "Hey, come
Mm,
on in. Let's talk about this." And she was very reluctant to be in the home. And she kind of told the story of how her brother lived in the basement and he died of something. And I don't remember. You'll have to forgive me for that. But she considered that the basement kind of had something wrong with it. But while her children are there, they start to kind of freak out in the house.
mhm.
And the son actually said some stuff, but then he's kind of like, he's afraid that he was going to take
Take
something
something
home.
home.
But then the daughter of this family, she asks Zac, and you can see it in her eyes. She can tell something is happening to her. And she
Mhm,
says, "Is the demon still here?" And what was scary is a couple of days later, she went kind of crazy and reacted what I would consider to the spirit and tried to stab herself to death.
mhm,
And so, and we'll kind of back up and go forward because the story is kind of all over the place, even in the documentary. But they end up, Zac, which I think was great, ended up bringing her to Father Maginot,
mhm,
who actually performed an exorcism on her in his church. And you can see when the spirit left her, and you
mhm.
can see how she was struggling. But these people literally went and visited the home, and then
Right.
something crazy happened. And like I said, in that part of the show, I would agree with you. That was raw footage. They wouldn't have known to stage it to where she would say, "Is the demon still in the house?" But you could see it in her
In her
eyes for
eyes.
sure.
Mhm.
Now, tell me what you thought about when Zac went and tried to talk to the Ammons family, but they wouldn't talk to him, but the brother came out. What did you think of that?
Oh, yeah, when they went to, the house and Latoya would not come out. She said, "No, I don't wanna talk to anyone. I don't want anything to do with it." And then the brother decided that he would talk to them, so actually, I think he went to the house. He went back to the house with Zach and his crew, and so he was just telling him the story about how his nieces and nephews were acting just kinda strange when they would come visit, and I think he experienced the nine-year-old son or his nine-year-old nephew that was thrown across the room, and then he was telling a story about that they were all just sitting around watching television or just, kids reading books or playing video games, and then all of a sudden they started making these really like chanting noises, like they started talking not in tongue, but like just like these chants. And the eyes started rolling, and then the other brother started chanting, and then the sister came in and said, "What are you guys doing? Stop it." And then she started chanting, and then they all three were just chanting, making all these sounds, and then the younger brother grabbed the older brother and started just reacting, and it just started fighting, and that really scared him, and I think they took him to the hospital, for that as well, so they've been to the hospital a couple times, and then, so he went to the house and was just kinda telling his story, and then when he went home or went back to his sister's house because he was living with his sister, I guess when they moved from Indiana to another section of town, I think they still lived in Indiana, um, but he started acting kinda strange the next couple of days, and then throughout the story, her sister asked him to leave the house because they felt like he brought something back with him when after he shook Zach's hand and went back to the house, and because he started acting differently, and then, the kids, so it just follows you. It seems like everyone that goes into that house or just it attaches to them, even like little things that can turn into, but if you've experienced that, like if that was my brother, I would have been really upset that he would even go knowing everything that they've gone through, and their kids are finally in a stable place, and to bring that back, even just the idea of it could just trigger it again
Yeah, and
or
she she had voiced that she didn't want anything to do with the documentary because she was afraid to reawaken things. And so she wasn't going to allow him to bring that back into the house. Now, speaking of that, of the house affecting people, for those of you, again, who haven't seen the documentary, there is a man, he's an investigator, a scientist, really, by the name of Barry Taft. And this guy is, I would call, old school paranormal guy. He was actually part of the Doris Bither story, which was eventually made into the movie The Entity. And if you are a fan of the paranormal, like these famous haunting stories, on our Patreon campaign, on a bonus episode, I actually did a whole episode on Doris Bither and the story that would eventually became the movie The Entity from the early 80s. But this story was famous because she met these two paranormal investigators in a bookstore, overheard them talking, and said, "Hey, you want a story? Let me tell you what happened to me." So he was this investigator that pioneered a lot of equipment and a lot of ways that they investigate the paranormal scientifically. So this guy's an old dog, man. And Zach
Hmm.
brings him to the house with all of his meters and equipment. And he starts to see there's some geological issues going on, maybe under the house. He's having a lot of readings. But then it gets very crazy paranormal because there's a scene where he walks by the bathroom and a literal black shadow entity in the middle of the day in broad daylight reaches out and tries to grab him. So it's not like it's one of those things where they did some production in the dark and a darker shadow came out. This was in the middle of the day and they have it on tape. And then he starts to have some physiological symptoms to the point where he was hospitalized. And even though this documentary was from, several years ago,
Hmm.
he's still in the hospital with organ failure. So tell me what your thoughts are when you were watching him interact and kind of what you saw with him as he was going through the house.
Yeah, I remember hearing like his name and like what he does like throughout the years. But yeah, that was really interesting. And actually, we forgot about the telling about the stairs with the dirt underneath their stairs.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
So, no, and that part of the movie was really interesting to me, and I totally believed that because they had a person that worked with NASA in the space shuttles in the space center and does some kind of work with the NASA. So I don't think Zach has that much money to pay this guy to like make this up. So he did the testing because they were saying, oh, maybe it's a thumbprint. You had your hand on the camera or something like that. But he did the testing and he said, no, it was something. But you can see like when the doctor was like kind of lightheaded and dizzy and kind of disoriented. And then he was just kind of had to like brace himself against a wall. And then all of a sudden it was like he was not carried but was kind of like led to that bedroom, and that bedroom was where that other kid, there was another family that lived there, like a 6-year-old kid died or something in that bedroom. And so he went to that bedroom. It was almost like the demon wanted him to go into that bedroom, and when he was walking out of it, it like just shot through, and they just did it in slow motion and then showed that guy that worked for the NASA doing the testing on how they did the test and explain it and all that good stuff. But I was like, wow. And he's just really sick into the hospital
Yeah,
from like
even
organ failure. And
even in part of the episode,
he,
they literally film him in intensive care. And so, yes, this NASA kind of scientist that studies film absolutely 100% stated it was not doctored film footage.
mhm.
Now, let's because time is going to escape us, so I'm kind of pushing us through here, but so let's talk about these cops. So during this investigation, these cops discover and Captain Charles Austin, as he's walking up the stairs, he notices that the entire basement is concrete with the exception of underneath the stairs that are going back up to the main level is dirt. And he said to himself, who would cement the entire basement floor but leave this part just dirt? And so, through a process of trying to sort out what was going on in the home, they dug up the under the stairs, and Father Maginot, is the one that told them these items appear to be, placed there as a
Hmm.
curse. And so they dig up these items, and they are, several items that if you had to believe in witchcraft or the occult or putting a spell or a curse on somebody, they were items that would be personal to somebody. What did you see? What were some of the items that you saw?
Oh yeah, it was oh, I could tell you. It was a red fingernail, it was like some children's socks, lady underwear, and there was like a metal bar, and I think a comb, and I think there was something else. Um, but yeah, it was under, and they dug all of it up, and then the cops were thinking like, "Oh wow, this is weird. This is different."
And so, for those of us who have kind of studied this topic for a long time, and even I would say that's maybe making something too complicated, most of us would know that if you wanted to put a curse on somebody, you'd find some personal items and do something with them and then bury them. And so they considered this thing to be an altar. But what was crazy is the police that left after that event. Charles Austin stated that as he drove up the road, his radio began to static, and then he
Hmm.
heard talking to him through the radio. And then the lieutenant who was there with him, and I forget his name, but he basically stated that when he got home and went to bed, he heard a person or somebody in his home, to the point where he tucked his wife in the corner, got his gun and his flashlight, and went to what they call clear the house.
Hmm.
And as he went through every corner of the house and was kind of dumbfounded, he was standing by the alarm panel. And when he was standing there, the alarm started to malfunction, which he of course then and his wife also said he absolutely brought something home, because the way that the alarm was malfunctioning, they stated that it would have to be done by somebody in the home that was
Hmm.
putting something in the keypad, which got crazier because while Zach had bought the home, he paid a security company to put in a security system, and the same thing happened. And the
Hmm.
security guy said this can only occur if somebody was in the home tampering with the equipment. So he got an entirely new system, a different brand,
Hmm.
different equipment, put it in the house, and the exact
Exact
same
same
thing
thing.
happened. And their phone started to malfunction right on the documentary. So Charles Austin stated that he thought that the entity messed with men kind of through their electronics, but it messed with women and children through physical.
Physical. Yep.
And so, if you look at the story and how it played out, that seems to be exactly what
What
happened. Is
happened?
that what you took from it?
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Okay, so we'll get to the dirt and the stairs in a little bit. So we'll put that on pause, because I think, at the end of this, that'll make sense why Melissa made sure we brought that up. So let's get back to the story. So Father Maginot decides that he's going to pray deliverance, or what the Catholics call do an exorcism, on Latoya. And so she actually went through more than one exorcism. And then, of course, as we just talked about earlier, she feels that they were released from this demon, which I love. And then she went and moved out of town, broke the lease, took off,
Hmm.
and then was trying to live a healthy life before her brother tried to bring it back into the house. But I say that because and I want to make sure I kind of walk this line, because a lot of times Protestants and Catholics kind of tend to fight about deliverance ministry. The Catholics are more liturgical about it with the Roman Rituale and the kind of, I guess, methodological way that they do an exorcism versus the Protestants that call on the name of the Lord and pray with people. But I would have to say that Father Maginot is the real deal
Mm-hmm.
because this exorcism worked. And so, in terms of what we do on this podcast, those are the things that make me happy because he was able to gain permission, because the Catholics have to go through a series of permissions within the church, and was able to perform this exorcism and free this family from the demon. And so, as far as the story of the documentary goes, it kind of stops there because it kind of turns into more Zach's show after that.
Mm-hmm.
But I just wanted to take the time and say, there's a lot of famous priests that do a lot of the what I would say paranormal circuit, and I don't have any disdain for any of them. But this just kind of local pastor,
Oh yeah, he was great. He was
local
amazing.
priest who literally was attacked on his bicycle right before he was doing the exorcisms because the
Mm-hmm.
demon came for him, was able to help this family. So this guy's the real deal. Now, why that's important is because as Zach takes over in terms of the storytelling, the priest decides that they should go back into the home and clear out that altar, bless those objects, and what he said, close the portal, which is exactly what it is. That's what an altar is.
Mm-hmm.
And so even if you want to look at it in terms of a Christian altar, like in a church, you are going to that altar as a way to submit yourself to God in a kind of a tangible form by opening, I would say, a portal, with your spirit and God's spirit as you lay your sins on the altar or lay your sacrifices on the altar, which for us, it would be our sin, our guilt, our shame. But for demons, it's, a little different. You're sacrificing sometimes people or sacrificing, through curses and things like that. So they're closing this demonic portal. But Zach, who, again, this is where you're going to hear this bias of me, this guy's demonized because this demon takes over him. And after they pull all these items out of the ground, which took him a long time to dig up, he sneaks down and goes and buries them again. And that priest
Priest
got
was
mad,
mad.
but he is so calm in his
He was,
demeanor.
but he was
I pray
livid.
I pray I would have that guy's demeanor because I would have knocked Zach out. But I digress because he was perpetuating this portal, and this priest was giving up his time and his energy. And I want to say this priest was attacked prior to doing these exorcisms because he was targeted by this demon. And so this man could have easily said, I'm done with that house because I helped the family. I'm on my way. But he's there trying to help. And Zach decides he's going to rebury it. So tell me what your thoughts were on the priest.
Oh yes, he was very upset. Very nice. I mean, he was amazing how he just helped everyone and just his demeanor um, throughout the whole process. And like you said, it did warm my heart that Latoya and their family did accept his help because that would have really scared me to have someone say, "Hey, I need to do an exorcism on you to get these demons." But she had to have been so terrified and so scared and like, "Hey God, please help me. I'll take this. This is the only way that I'm going to get rid of these things instead of like going to the internet trying to see what they can find and burning some sage and doing all these other things instead of just, praying and asking, Lord for and God for help." But yeah, that priest, he was very upset. He actually had to go outside and take a break.
And he was just
He
pacing,
was
rocking
pacing
back and forth.
and he was
God bless him.
livid. He was. But yep, he went and buried it and then he made Zach dig it up again. And then he left one item. Now that we're talking it through, so now that makes sense. So he left the portal open.
Because he couldn't find the
He
fingernail
couldn't
again,
find the fingernail.
or said he couldn't find it.
Yeah.
And just to kind of because the story, like I said, is all over the place, even on the documentary. So I don't have any problem
I know
doing
we get
this
so excited when trying to crawl it all
chronologically.
in all at once.
But Zach ends up demolishing the house and, of course, saves the staircase
Stairs.
and some of the dirt. And Melissa and I both said, I'll bet you that
Fingernail
fingernail's
is
in that dirt.
mm-hmm.
So let's get back to business there. So the priest tries to exercise these items, or what I would call bless these items to close the portal, but he doesn't believe it was closed because he didn't have all the items. So now let's get back to kind of our analysis of this documentary called The Demon House, because Zac, and again, I'm doing my best with the bias here, but Zac is more interested in my belief system of making a great documentary, which it is. It's so entertaining. My goodness. If you said that was a bad documentary, I'd fight you in the street, because it's so good and it's so
Uh-huh.
entertaining. However, there's not a real interest in the actual residuals or the actual consequences of playing with demons. And as evidenced by the fact that during the filming of this, one of Zac's cameramen actually goes into, I would say, the biggest spiral
Mhm.
I may have ever seen in a human being. And this is from somebody who has been a literal ordained minister praying deliverance over countless people. And I
Mhm.
don't think I've ever seen somebody spiral this fast. Tell me what your thoughts were, what you saw, and kind of how that transpired with this guy.
Oh, yeah, the cameraman. So he was not a believer. He thought it was just, things that he saw on Zach's show and thought, oh, this would be great. I'm a cameraman. I would love to follow, Zach around and maybe learn some things about, you know, what he does and like, I guess, get better on his job being a cameraman. But there was one scene where I think they were all in the basement. It seems like after more of the activity seems to happen once they or you enter the basement and you're in the basement for a little while and then like everyone kind of gets sick and get very aggressive and things. And so I think that's what happened with this cameraman. And so he was acting a little strange, and so they all went back upstairs, and then they was just like taking a break, and because everyone was just getting overwhelmed, getting anxious. And I think if this was the same scene where Zach was grabbed Jay aggressively and kind of like pushed him, like grabbed him by the shoulders and was like pushing him around the room and
Yeah.
like yelling and telling him to, get the F out of my face and and then just like you can see his physical body just changed. And so they went back upstairs. And so the cameraman just all of a sudden just put his camera on the floor. Now, I'm a part-time photographer as a hobby. You never put your equipment on the floor. I would never put my
Absolutely. Those
especially
cameras
those
are
cameras are
probably
so
expensive.
expensive. So to put a huge camera that you're carrying over your shoulder just on the floor. So he set the camera down on the floor and then he just laid on the floor, like totally on his back, just out, just whole face body was just drained. And so Zach and all them were like talking. And then all of a sudden you see the camera guy just almost creepily guide up and just kind of tiptoed down into the basement like someone was calling him to go into the basement. And so he just kind of looked around and just kind of creeped against the wall and just tiptoed like and no one saw him and he went down into the basement. And I think he was in the basement for about 15 or 20 minutes before they realized that he had went back down to the basement and then he came back up and it just went downhill from there. Like that night they went to the hotel room. I'll let you tell that part.
Well,
Saw a demon in the elevator.
yep, he absolutely did.
Oh, that goat, that like 8-foot goat, in which one of Zach's friend warned him, like, "Hey, I have a friend. They saw this 8-foot goat with some horns. It's the biggest devil demon he's ever seen." He's like, "Hey, bro, you do not want to mess with this. This is legit. This is the real deal." And yeah.
So there's a very well-known psychic by the name of Chris Fleming. If you are a paranormal fan, you know exactly who I'm talking about. If not, it would take you 2 seconds to type his name in Google and you'd find him on several shows, several different projects, because he's one of the well-known psychics on the planet, especially when it comes to the paranormal. So Zach had had a dream before he bought the home and started the documentary
Mhm.
about this goat figure, but he didn't tell anybody. And then when Chris Fleming warned him about it, it was what it was in his dream, but he had never told his crew. And so when they returned from this day at the house where the cameraman was obviously affected,
Mhm.
in the middle of the night they heard him screaming Zach's name. And what happened, according to the cameraman, is that he went out, he felt weird, and he was going to go out because he had an urge to go back to the house,
They were
which,
back at the hotel at
yeah,
this
they were
time.
at the hotel at this point. And, but he had an urge to go back to the house. So he went to push the elevator button and it opened a few inches and he saw that goat demon in the elevator. So he started screaming Zach's name. And you can tell the guy when you're interviewing him that he is not a sissy. He's a
Mhm.
big, tough dude. And he was even embarrassed that he was screaming Zach's name. Well, when Zach came out in the hall because the whole crew went and got him, this guy was on a rampage. And
Mhm.
again, I'm picking on Zach a little bit, but he's always plays to be the tough guy because he's a big muscle guy. You know, he lifts a lot of weights, you can tell. But he was terrified
Oh,
of this
yeah.
dude. He was running away from him. He was hiding behind the cameraman. Because this guy was volatile. And so they eventually calm him down and bring him into their hotel
Hotel
room
room.
to interview him, but he gets angry and tells them to turn off the camera. And this is again Zach's thinking. They didn't turn the camera off, they just put it on the floor. And you can hear his interview. And he basically tells Zach, that thing wasn't
Well,
here for
yeah.
me.
Mhm.
It's here for you. You know exactly what I saw. When Zach asked him what he saw, he said, you know exactly what I saw. Now, here's where it gets crazy. And this is where you'll get an idea of why I have this, I struggle with animosity towards Zach because this man's life spiraled out of control. And if you watch the documentary, you only see a glimpse of it. But if you watch the lost tapes part
Mhm.
of the documentary, which was, I think, released a year or so later, this man went full demonic because he became possessed in that moment. When he was in that house and laid on the floor, that's when he became possessed. And I want to say this, and I want you to hear my heart in this. That's what it would look like when somebody got possessed. It wouldn't look like the movies. It wouldn't look like a black shadow came, flying through the house at supernatural speed and the black smoke went in their mouth. Am I saying that's never happened? No. But I'm saying it's a lot more subtle because this man was a non-believer and he didn't have any faith in anything. He's an atheist. And so this thing got a hold of him. It singled him out because of his apathy.
Mhm.
Because even somebody who is not necessarily a Christian believer or maybe even a Muslim believer or a believer in another faith, but they believe in something, demonic, they are on edge. They kind of almost in a way are protecting themselves or at least allowing God to protect them in some way, shape, or form by having some belief. But when somebody's so apathetic about the subject, that's who a demon is really going to go after. And almost to the point where I would say in my career, I have seen a lot of people that would tell me that they almost challenged a demon because
Oh, yes.
I don't
That's
believe in this stuff. So,
mhm.
come after me and show me you're real. That's the dumbest thing
So
you can
you're
say. So,
mhm.
this poor man, if you watch the videos, he has 666 tattooed all over his hands. He's got this weird picture with this weird symbol on his forehead, and he's got a girl that's kneeling down in front of him. It is so disturbing and demonic. But
Mhm.
this man freaked out so much that Zach basically had to fire him. And I can't say for sure because I don't know Zach and I don't really know what happened, but this guy kind of got thrown to the wolves and then that's it. And that's where I struggle because you go to these homes and you try to rally things up so you can have this documented evidence, which is not only sometimes important in the paranormal field, but it's definitely entertaining. But do you really know what you're messing with?
Oh, now I see what you're saying. So how we're talking about Zach, but other people that have these shows, and I'm sure he has several shows for 20 years plus. So he has to have a lot of demons and things attached to him. So he brings innocent people into these situations, and if they're vulnerable, like you said, or and just attack this poor guy. I mean, you can totally see
Exactly.
it like in his face, his whole demeanor. And this was a big guy, like Zach's at what, at least 6'2",
I think Zach's 6 foot,
six
but
one, something like that. This guy was at least like 6'3", because in the when you see it, the documentary, you can see the height. I was like, wow, this guy's pretty big. So no wonder Zach was running away from him. But yeah, like he we're saying like something just touched him, like his hands, and that's where he had those the 666 tattoos
yeah.
on both of his hands, and he just kind of just went
And that's it,
spiraled down from there.
and
That was
that's what I'm
sad.
saying, because
Now I get what you're
yeah,
saying.
you
Yeah.
you go with these ghost hunters to these haunted places, and if you watch any paranormal shows, undoubtedly you'll find an episode, regardless of which show you're watching. And by the way, the Travel Channel became the ghost hunting channel, so you can go there if you don't know what I'm talking about. There's a million ghost shows, but there undoubtedly is one where I was a paranormal investigator and I was doing this for years, and then I went to this certain place and brought something home, because you're opening yourself up to these spirits. And Zach, I believe, is demonized. Now, Zach has claimed that he's had to have exorcisms performed on himself. I know his cameraman and now right hand man, uh, who is probably was the third string, then became the second string, which is Aaron, when Nick Groff left the show. And I'm not going to get into that feud between those guys, but Aaron has literally lost a marriage and had some severe problems and had to be exorcised from doing these things. Yet they continue to go. And so who you're hurting isn't necessarily who you would think would get hurt, because
Mm-hmm.
Zach, if he's demonized, these demons are loving the attention,
Attention.
they're loving the energy that they're getting from this. But it's the people that are with somebody like Zach, and they'll claim, well, I'm fighting these things, or I'm taking these things on. Why would you
Mm-hmm.
pick a fight with these things unless you were actually trying to help a family? Now, I'm going to say this. There's another famous ghost hunter that's on probably the second or third most famous paranormal show. And he recently on social media put out a post that said something to the effect of, you know, I've been doing this for 7,000 years and I've never ran into a demon. And if anybody was going to see one kind of attitude, it would have been me. And I'm like,
Ooh.
what an arrogant thing to say,
Say.
because that means he's gone to all of those people's homes and acted like he heard them, and acted like he cared, and acted like he believed them, but he was just truly there looking for evidence. So he believes everything is a ghost, not a demon. And somebody would ask me maybe, well, why hasn't he been possessed? Because he doesn't need to be. He's not a believer. The devil has him. Who the devil is going to target is somebody who he doesn't have yet. Now,
Mm-hmm.
am I saying that this guy, the second guy I'm talking about, is possessed? No, but he's a non believer. And when you're a non believer, why would the devil mess with you?
Mm-hmm.
He's got you, and you don't even know he's got you. And this might offend some people, but I'm just being honest. We come from a Christian background here, and I am somebody who's been called middle of the night, middle of the day, and everywhere in between to help countless people. And there's always the story of where these things wore them down and whittled them down. And right at the moment where you wouldn't have thought that something crazy was going to happen, it did. And these people can look back in hindsight and say, this is when the demon came into my life. This is
Mm-hmm.
when the demon entered me. But when we go back, and it's almost like a counseling session, because you don't just say deliverance over somebody and then, good luck. You work with these people, you get them to counselors, you get them to ministers, and you continue to work with them. And they will always say the same thing. Now, in hindsight, I can go back and say that demon was trying to get in 5 years ago, 7 years ago, 10 years ago. But these demons will sometimes follow these ghost hunters and almost leave them alone, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
because they are gaining all this energy and attention. And so this guy who's saying, he's never seen a demon, he's basically minimizing, millions of people around the world that have had these episodes because he's never seen it. Think of the narcissism or
Right.
arrogance in
Yeah.
that.
Hmm.
And so in a kind of an opposite fashion is Zach, because he believes he has almost adopted a philosophy that he is at a certain place in his spirituality that he could just go play with these things
Things
like
and
toys. And what he doesn't realize, and what I think I see in him, is when he has these angry outbursts, which is almost every episode on his show where he's beating up poor Jay and Billy. Why do you have these rageful episodes? Well, because he has an anger problem. Well, maybe, but does the demon use the anger problem, or is the anger problem from the demon? And when people start getting close to him, or when he starts getting overtaken by these demons,
hmm
is it his rage or is it their rage? And so all
never looked
that
at
to
it like that.
yeah, all that to say, this poor guy is collateral damage. Zach goes on with his show.
And
Zach owns a haunted museum with all these haunted artifacts that he just takes from people and puts them in his sideshow attraction. They've called him the modern day P.T. Barnum because he really is.
Mhm.
And this poor guy is sitting somewhere demon possessed. Why didn't Zach get him to a minister? And maybe Zach tried, I don't know, but my heart bleeds for this guy
Mhm.
because this guy was simply a cameraman trying to make a couple dollars
Dollars
to support his family and wound up the one who suffered the most.
most. Yeah.
Now, as we kind of get towards the conclusion of this episode, I want to say a couple things here in terms of the final scene of this documentary. So now, if you've seen the documentary or if you know who Zach is, you'll notice that all of a sudden in his career, he came out with these dorky, ridiculous glasses on his face. And as much as I'm picking on the guy, Melissa's right. He's kind of a hot, big muscle dude who, he's dated Playboy models and supermodels, and now he's wearing these, dorky pop bottle glasses. Well, if you've watched this documentary, you'll know that he claims that during his lockdown in this house, where he was literally boarded in, where he could
That was
not
the
escape.
craziest thing ever.
Yeah, he literally had them put plywood on the windows and doors, screwed him into the house so he couldn't get out.
Remember that cop said, "Are you sure you want to do that? You're actually going to lock yourself
Yeah.
in." He said,
Well, call me and
"Well,
I'll have
call
the
me."
fire department break down the door. But so he has this final scene, but before we get to that, he brings in this furniture. Like he has a truck pull up and he's got some chairs and a dresser and a TV and a bed. So he has some furniture, I guess, to be in there. And then they board him in. And as he's laying in the bed at night, he hears a growl. And he's the only one in the house, of course. And then he sees this shadow walk through the wall. Then the next scene, you see him in the kitchen just with this excruciating pain in his head. And then he reports that he had this condition that occurred and it
Mhm.
literally destroyed his eyesight
Eyesight.
to where he has to wear these prism glasses. And he stated that he can't get a surgery because the risk is too high, because if it goes wrong, he can be blind, which is why he wears the glasses. So, Melissa, I'm going to ask you, as you saw that final scene and you saw kind of, what it looked like the shadow go through the wall, and you could even start at the fact that why is this guy boarded in the house in the first place? But what did you notice?
Well, he's just I to lock yourself in there, but that's what Zach does. But because the house was empty, and then I just assumed that because they brought in a bed, he had to have somewhere to sleep because he was going to spend the night in the hotel. I mean, in that house, and he bought furniture like like two uh like in like chairs and like a TV stand. I think there was some TVs or a TV or something on the dresser or the stand, and I think some flowers. It just looks like he was trying to make it like more homey because he was going to be there for like 24 hours. So, but that's how I took it, that he just needed some furniture in the house.
Now, Melissa and I, when we were watching this documentary, and I have seen it before, but I didn't say anything to her because this is where the skeptic in me comes in. And I'm going to tell you why. Because if you watch the documentary, a truck comes in and it looks like he's bringing in some, I would say, Goodwill furniture.
Yeah, it wasn't brand new, just
And I would have
stuff
done
sitting on
that.
the floor.
I wouldn't have gone
Lamps, yeah, those
to
lamps.
a fine furniture
The
shop to put furniture in this rundown house that, is real tiny. So it seemed like he wanted to have some chairs and a TV maybe to kill the time. But see, here's what I noticed. What I noticed is that this TV was one of those bubble TVs. And what I mean by that, for some of you who are younger and don't know what I'm talking about, not everything was a flat screen. These TVs were actually like a bubble. They had tubes in them. So they were very heavy and they were very thick. They were
Mhm.
very deep. And nobody has those TVs anymore, even in 2018. So what I'm going to say is that TV couldn't have been hooked up because there was no rabbit ears. There was nothing that he could have powered that TV. And I noticed that. And then I kind of put it when I first saw it and I put it in my mind. And then when Zac is having his freak out at the end because this excruciating headache, he throws the TV
Oh, yeah, he goes crazy and just started
and it's this
oh.
real high kind of hutch type dresser thing. And I'm like, that was staged. Because if he would have bought a
Oh.
flat screen and put it in there and the TV was on and he was watching it during part of the documentary, then it would have been more believable. But he bought an old $5 TV from Goodwill that he could throw across the room. And because I've been watching Zac for a long time, I saw that as the showmanship. Now, does that mean that the other stuff in this documentary wasn't real? Of course not. But that final scene concerned me. And then the second thing I noticed is when he's laying in the bed, there's a camera that's kind of sitting above him. So it's almost like a security camera
Mhm.
facing from his upper right, which would be the camera's upper left. And he's looking down on Zac as he's kind of curled up in the corner on the bed, looks
Mhm.
terrified when he heard the growl. But then it goes to this weird camera that's sitting like bed level and it's real blurry, almost like a prism, like the prism glasses that he wears.
Mhm.
And then it goes even blurrier. And then you kind of see the shadow go through the blurry prism of this camera, almost symbolic of the what it did to his vision. And so
Oh.
there's
Mhm.
to me that was the 100% proof to me. Now I could be wrong because I don't like a lot of skeptics when it comes to this field because they become jerks, if you will. But in that case, I'd be like, well, how did the camera know to go blurry? And then it just happened to do that to his eyes. Now, could somebody come and prove to me that the camera actually did that and the same thing happened to his eyes because of whatever this entity was? Maybe, but I doubt it. Now, I say that all to say that Zac does have some condition with his eyes because that happened. But I've heard in earlier stories that he actually had this thing happen to him before. And so maybe this was a condition that was already going to exist, or maybe this is what pushed him over the top.
Mhm.
But long story short, Zac has now got these cool prism glasses that he wears that make him look like, they always remind me of the old days when they had those real thick glasses. Melissa and I aren't spring chickens. So somebody would turn and look at you and their eyes get real big and those big Coke bottle glasses. They almost remind me of those. But, he rocks them. He makes them cool because he's kind of a cool dude. But he decides after that to demolish the house. And he does. But he keeps some items in a storage
In the
locker,
stores like it. Mhm.
which tells me that if this is true and this portal is still open, this is now one of the many demons that is attached
Attached
to him.
him.
Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, I agree.
So,
That
overall,
totally makes
what
mhm.
are your thoughts on this case? What are your thoughts on just the whole thing?
I found it very interesting. I do believe it. because like you said, there's so many eyewitnesses and documentation and like reports and um the priest. It was just, I do believe that it really happened, and I'm glad that Zach did tear the house down, so like there's no more, squatters in the house, or people, can break into the house and like try to do more rituals, like once people see something on TV. Now, me personally, I'm okay with watching these things from afar. I would never go to a haunted house or go to like an asylum or a cemetery trying to see something, or I want to see a ghost. I've seen my one ghost and I don't want to see another one. But what are your thoughts on it?
I think I'm
Like
with you. I think overall, I think I love the fact that this family,
reached out to
yeah,
the
they found some
they
help.
found some help.
And to me, that's the most heartwarming part.
Mhm.
I always bleed for these people. I've my ministry was always based on this concept. I like to get in the mud with people. I'm somebody who struggled with these demons since I was very young, and they attacked my family. I performed my first deliverance at 16 years old in my house, almost 17. So, I've seen these things and know the kind of toll they take on families, my family included. And so for people to find deliverance and find relief is great. The documentary itself, if you're looking for entertainment value, I don't know how you can beat it.
Mhm.
That story will grab you from start to finish, especially if you watch the lost tapes. But again, my biases are always, along the lines of, make sure you realize that you're dragging people into these things.
Mhm.
We started out earlier with the joke that would I take Melissa with me into one of these homes to pray for these people? No, I wouldn't, because it puts people at danger. Now, if God called her to do that, I wouldn't stop her, but we are definitely going to pray before we walk into these places. We're not just going to walk in and say, "Hey, the ghost hunters are here. Let's get this demon out of here." It doesn't work that way,
Mhm.
because it's not our fight. We're simply trying to help these people fight the fight of their lives. And we have to be prayed up, and we have to be aware that what we're doing affects other people. So when we do go as a team, we say a lot of prayers, we cover each other, we watch each other's backs, we never go alone, and we're not there to document evidence. We're there to see if these things are real and then help people. So
Mhm.
in terms of that part of the documentary, I just, my heart again bleeds for that poor cameraman who is now demonized, and I hope somewhere in between now and then he's found some
Mhm.
deliverance of his own. I do want to
Yeah.
say that there's some skeptics to this whole thing, and start with their original doctor. He thought they were hallucinations, thought they were crazy, or that they needed, kind of some help. And that because, the children didn't go to school very often, and that they were just trying to make up stories, and it kind of got out of control. There's another very famous skeptical investigator by the name of Joe Nickel. Just going to be honest with you, I'm just as biased towards him as he's biased towards people like me, because you can have a demon walk up and shake this guy's hand, possess him, come out of his mouth, and tell him what his insides look like. And this guy would go, "Well, I was hallucinating that day." This guy he doesn't believe anything. But he brought up the fact that the Captain Charles Austin was an admitted believer in the supernatural before this happened. He found some of the photos that people had on the internet and used them as a way to show that this whole thing was a hoax. But a lot of those photos weren't done by the investigators, they were done by people
People. Mhm.
who use cell phone apps to add ghosts into the windows and such. Um, and so, it was later proven what he called the Hammond Police Department's tainted photos weren't taken by the police at all.
Mhm.
But this guy, like I said, if you can go find him on Google as well. I mean, this guy hasn't believed anything. I don't think he believes 2 + 2 is 4. And so, he's not somebody who I put a lot of stock to. But he does point out the fact that the landlord said that he never saw any paranormal things happen there, that he didn't really hear a whole lot about it. You can also point out that the squatters that were in Zach's home when he bought this home, when he first got there, said there was nothing there until they started talking about being on the documentary and money being involved. But I want to say this as we close. This is a very common theme. And for those of you who listen to this podcast, this is probably the 7,000th time you've heard me say this. And I'll say it 7,000 more times. Houses are not haunted. People are haunted. Now, that doesn't mean a demon doesn't have a place to dwell while they're waiting for the next person to haunt, or it doesn't mean that there isn't a portal open in certain locations where demons could come back and forth and happen to stumble upon you when we're there. But I have known several people, as well as you could find a zillion horror movies where, like the Amityville horror movie, for example, many people have lived in that home since the Lutzes and the DeFeos lived there that would say there's nothing wrong with the house.
Mm-hmm.
But at the right time, in the right place, a demon could be roaming through because other energy had been there, seeing if it's a good place to take a little rest, waiting for the next people to come through. And if that family who comes through is happy and healthy and not a lot of chaos and a lot of love and a lot of Jesus and a lot of spirituality, that demon's going to move on somewhere else. But if the family that moves in to the house after the previous haunting is also in turmoil and they're also living in sin and keeping a lot of secrets and kind of, in a bad place, the demons feed off that energy. And so I believe that the landlord probably didn't hear a lot of stories because, let's face it,
He was in a better house
he was not in
and
the house.
living
And more
in a
importantly,
gated community.
are you really going to call your landlord unless it's super crazy like this family did and say, I think there's a ghost in your house? Most of us would just try to either pray it away or pretend it wasn't there, or we
Mhm.
make up an excuse to move because we're afraid to be believed. And so the skeptics of this, if you're looking strictly at the documentary, I just did your job for you. I think Zach staged a lot of that last scene and maybe some of the other scenes. But I also think that there's way too much evidence and way too many corroborating witnesses to say that this family was literally haunted by demons and that deliverance ministry was done and they have found relief, which is all we ask for when we're looking at stories like this. And unfortunately, many stories don't end like this. Many stories end with deaths and strange occurrences that get explained away by mental illness or dysfunctional families, when in reality there was demons involved and nobody's going to talk about that. So Melissa, I'm so glad to have you as this co-host. I look forward already to next week because, as we discussed what we're going to talk about in the next episode, it's one of our favorite paranormal episodes that we watch together that we probably bring up about 3 times a week. So we're going to cover that next week. But I'm glad you're here. What are your
Yes, thank
thoughts?
you.
You
Oh,
liking
it's a
it?
lot of fun. Yeah. Getting more
Good.
comfortable, a little nervous, but it's fun.
Yeah, Melissa's nervousness
It's
continues to blow me away because she's the most extroverted person in the
I
world.
know.
And we heard her laugh earlier. We'll bring some more of that out. She's an amazing person with a huge personality. So I appreciate you being here.
Yes, thank you. It's fun.
Well,
I'm excited.
we'll do it next week. Before we close, let's say this. If you are somebody who is liking what we're doing here, please give us a like, a subscribe, hit the bells, hit the thumbs up, do all those things. Most importantly, always tell your friends and family. Again, if you or somebody you know is struggling with the paranormal or spiritual warfare, have them reach out to us. If you have some questions, reach out to us. We read every email. If you have some suggestions or some cases that you want us to cover or topics you want us to cover, please send those to us as well. We'll try to get to as many of those as we can. Again, if you are somebody who's looking for a little bonus content, we do have a Patreon campaign. That's patreon.com/freedom from the struggle. And you can find an extra 2 bonus episodes every month. And we are going to do at the $2 level, we're going to start releasing the episodes a day early. So for those of you who are subscribing at the $2 level, you won't just get the back catalog, but new episodes will be released a day early. And then for those of you who are at the $5 level, you will get the bonus episodes as well as hearing the episode a day early as well. So, again, thank you for joining us on Freedom from the Struggle. We look forward to hearing from you next week. Thanks for stopping by, and may God bless you.